I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Rich Hoffman, Executive Board Member at the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. Rich has a BA in Organizational Communications from Wright State University. He currently works as an enterprise architect at Redstone Arsenal and the Marshall Space Flight Center and has over 54 years of experience investigating and researching the UFO subject. Rich has also served as the Director of Investigations, STAR Team Manager, and Director of Strategic Projects, as well as the State Director of MUFON, and worked with numerous related organizations. So, Rich, welcome back. It has been a while, sir. Before we get started, I want to preface our conversation. So again, you're one of the executives on the board of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which is undoubtedly the most scientific, rigorous, and trusted organizations doing research in UAP. So thank you so much for joining me today to talk about everything that's going on.
Thank you, Tim. We've worked really hard at keeping it that way, by the way, and doing good stuff. And so it's been a very rewarding for me to be able to be a part of such a great organization that is rapidly growing. I think right now we have about 260 members, and we just had a 2-day conference this past weekend, and it was successful. We had 9 countries represented as far as presenting. And we had young and old people that were all presenting. I mean, I'm talking about students that were up in Canada and other countries and stuff as well. So it was incredible experience. People are still raving about it. And I'm glad in my life to be in the position to be able to have these experiences.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, again, right now, this time especially, there are so many rumors and narratives and half-truths, and we're not sure what's what floating around there. And so the fact that the SU is
Yep.
focused on rigorous analysis of data and pursuing things in a scientific manner, that's absolutely amazing and is so needed. It's absolutely needed. So
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
well, so in terms of that, we have the July 26th congressional hearing with testimony by UFO whistleblowers Ryan Graves, David Grusch, and David Fravor. And so this, I think, for me at least, threw me for a loop. I think for a lot of us, there's a big change in the narrative. And, when I was brainstorming, who could I talk to who could help shed light on this? You absolutely came to mind. What are your impressions of the hearing and the testimony?
Well, I thought that was very historic. I think it was very well done. It actually exceeded my expectations. I was initially feared, not knowing who they were going to have, that this could have been like some sort of a carnival kind of thing, and I was like, oh, okay, well, here we go again. It's going to be another upset, another failure. When I heard the announcement of the 3 people that were going to be on board, a big sigh of relief came over me. And I was glad to see that these people were going to be the ones that were going to be going up in front of this congressional hearing. I know Ryan. He was my keynote last year at the conference that we had in Huntsville. And I also traveled with him over to Bologna, Italy for a NATO meeting. The 2 of us briefed, and I believe it was in October of last year, or actually November. Anyway, I'm thrilled to death that he was going to be able to present. Commander Fravor, without a doubt. I mean, exceptional case. SCU investigated that case. We spoke to like 18 people on board the incident. Spent a lot of time putting together a 277-page paper, looking at the physics of the object as it was described, the video as well. And just, it was an incredible case with a lot of sensory data and a lot of credible witnesses. So his testimony was exceptionally good. David Grusch was actually at my conference last year as well. I got a brief meeting just to say hi to him. I didn't really have a chance because I was running the meeting, the conference, and I didn't get to spend time with a lot of people, but I know people did, and I know that they had a chance to chat with him. Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp and Jay Stratton and a whole bunch of people were at the meeting, and they all sat down together and had a conversation. It was a very, very, very good meeting, and apparently that led to a lot of other things. But bottom line was that these were very credible people. I mean, Dave Grusch has got like security clearances out the you know what, and at the same time, he's highly credible. And all three of these people were sworn under oath, which is another huge thing in the sense that, you're not wanting to put yourself in contempt of like in Congress or something like that by lying. So the proof is that they're willing to come on the record, and it's the job of the government then, if they want to question anything, to investigate it. And I believe that they're going to go into closed door hearings where he's able to then provide a lot more details than he could to a secure few who have got the clearances to be able to receive it. That could lead to them to doing some sort of investigation. And I'll say one other thing, Tim. I think that, with the fact that he did state the fact that, that he provided to the Inspector General actually testimony from other firsthand witnesses of this kind of claims that were going on, that supports what he's trying to say. And that's remarkable.
Yeah. Well, so as someone who's studied this phenomena for decades,
Yeah.
I was going to ask what you think about the claims that he's made that the government has recovered crashed UFOs and alien bodies.
Yeah, to me it's like no surprise. And I guess what I preface that with the fact is that we all have heard about Roswell. I think, and there's not too many people that haven't. It's been everything from popular TV and everything else. So that was a crash, and allegedly that crash was recovered. You have other crashes like Kecksburg, which, if you look in the history in Pennsylvania, that was also a collection effort in which the materials were confiscated. So I don't understand why anybody would be surprised that we haven't got materials or something over a period of time if those two cases are indeed credible. And I think, quite honestly, with the sheer volume of witnesses and the other documents and everything else we've been able to find, that they are deemed credible cases. And so also the fact that you have materials that have been provided to, it used to be called Foreign Technology Division. Initially it was called ATIC, which was the Air Technical Intelligence Center, and is now called NASIC, the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. They are continuing to play a role even in the current role with AARO, in the sense that, they're actually going to be playing that material science for AARO. And so I believe that in history that there's been evidence provided. I also think that there are these unacknowledged SAP programs that exist out there that hopefully they're going to be looking into and getting more clarity about, that in which there has probably been wreckage that's been provided to a contractor or a defense contractor with, to have them look into this material. They may not even know where the provenance of the material is from, but, they've now received it and said, here, see what you can figure out about this. And they're looking at it. So I do believe that, and also a good friend of mine was Len Stringfield. Len roughly in the 70s came through with a whole bunch of monographs that he was writing, because he was collecting all these witnesses at that time that were coming forward and telling him about the fact that there were these crash retrievals, and that there were bodies and various other things that were collected. So for me, it's not a surprise. For the general, probably the world, maybe it is. But and I've also got very good friends that they're very trustworthy and very dear, that have played major roles, who have told me, yes, they've got them. So I've even received that kind of thing over my history, the fact that we've had this wreckage and this debris or whatever like that. So again, no surprise, but to a very novice government that is like toddler age with the whole subject, maybe that's pretty compelling.
Yeah. Well, and despite the government being kind of novices to this, as Donald Rumsfeld once said, there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And David Grusch absolutely has a remarkable career pedigree. But a lot of the information that he's providing is, at least for the moment, unknown. The thing that struck me about it, though, was Congress has had, I believe he mentioned, at least two 11-hour detailed briefings that are classified, as well as I believe he's provided documentation, and he is willing or has now provided a list of hostile and cooperative witnesses, right? So there's a lot that he has already produced. We just haven't been privy to it yet. And my thought was that if he was somehow lying or delusional or just retelling stories, Congress would have distanced themselves from both himself and the hearing, right? And that's not what we're seeing. It seemed
Yes.
like they leaned into it. And for me, that seems to indicate yet further that he's the real deal, I guess. Would you agree with that?
Completely agree. I mean, right behind him at the conference, besides George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, was the inspector, one of the inspector general agents that's working with him. In addition to that, to the left, it looked like that was James Clapper. James Clapper was like originally the DNI. My wife worked under him at DIA when he was there at Defense Intelligence Agency, and when we were living in the DC area at the time. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of people that are backing up everything that he's saying, including if you listen to all the other people that have come out in the past in terms of their high pedigree and talking about the fact that these objects exist and there's way more evidence that we don't know about, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is that these are very, very credible claims. I don't know what to do with them because, again, I'm not privy to the evidence like you or me in terms of what they are that I can investigate and look into. But they're at least something that needs to be looked into, and if it's indeed something that they can find out more about, it's going to be curious, by the way, how they execute this. Think about, am I going to go to like an XYZ company and knock on your doors and say, show me the alien stuff? Am I going to, are they going to do that? Can they do that? Do they have the authority? Who's going to have the authority to be able to follow through? Is it going to be the inspector general that will go and look into this? Maybe they are the authority that can do something with that. But what I don't know are those procedures and steps that will follow. The other thing is that very curiously is just the reaction of Sean Kirkpatrick at AARO with the whole testimony. I don't know if you're going to talk about that, but that was also very curious to me.
Now, do you think that you could share a little bit about that? What was it that was curious? I don't think I've actually seen his reaction yet, so I would love to hear more.
So Sean Kirkpatrick wrote how basically he was not happy with the meeting that happened. I guess maybe the day before. He posted it up on his LinkedIn page, and that kind of was passed around on the internet and stuff like that. But bottom line, he was defending his investigators, and he made some sort of a statement saying something like that the people that he's got working for him are at some sort of a risk, and that was also kind of interesting because I don't know what the risk would be from the congressional hearing the day before, why he would have made that statement. But anyway, it was one of those like he's very disillusioned by the fact that these claims of a crash thing, have happened, and it was very disappointing, I guess, for him that happened. And I don't understand why he made that, because I was extremely thrilled about it, personally, and. You would think that an organization at AARO would also be thrilled about having that kind of like look as well, and knowing fully well that either he would be a part of it, or he would be privy to all of the same kind of information, that the Congress would work cooperatively with AARO as the lead for that. So what is the threat and what is the risk to his investigators? I know that he's got a very strong and well-documented kind of like procedure or process that he's claiming that he put in place to be able to look at cases. There's a lot of us that are questioning about transparency, and that is, I was on an interview this morning with News Nation, and they were even asking, let's say, well, where do people go to report? And, he's claiming that he's got 600 to 800 some odd cases. And I don't know what the count is now, but he's 800 cases at least that have been reported to his team. And they're going through it and looking at it and trying to determine. And he comes up with statistics that show that, the vast majority of these things are spherical in nature. And, and then he can talk about the altitudes that they were at and various other things, which means that he's getting some sort of reports. The question is, from which organizations is he receiving the report? Is he receiving it from the Air Force? Is he receiving it from the Coast Guard? Is he receiving it from Homeland Security? Is he receiving it from who's cooperating and who's not cooperating? And some claims are that the Air Force is not cooperating. Well, I work at an Army, and I've got access to classified systems, and I know that the Air Force is reporting their sightings into a common repository, but I'm sure that it's somehow going to be passed up or is planned to be passed up. But there's no presence on the web of talking about AARO. We've been looking for websites to see if we can. Who does anybody report to? How do they report? We just don't understand it. So there you go. That's. I'll shut up for a minute. You can ask me another question.
Well, I mean, going to AARO, and actually I'm going to skip around a little bit in them, but
yeah.
The narrative was focused on air safety, and it seemed to be very mechanistic, right? It's like, okay, we have the data, and as you mentioned, I believe he showed what they call the Mosul sphere, and he said this is an example of one that we can't identify. He showed another one and said this is an example of one that we did identify as something mundane, so it seemed like it took a large jump from that into basically the realm of conspiracies, cover-ups, and extraterrestrials. And so I wonder if maybe some of the consternation that he's expressing comes from it complicating his job to some degree, because it opens up to a much larger, much less well-defined story. And I was also going to ask, does this make the SCU's job more difficult as well? Because again, it takes it out of the realm of simple data and starts to move it into, history, as well as a lot of these weighted unknowns, right? Where is it more or less likely to be true? And ultimately, we're not sure.
Yeah, I think, for the most part, SU would like to be able to have very coherent data that's been, made available for us to look at. In the past, we've been able to look at things that were in essence, leaks, if you would, like the Nimitz case or the Aguadilla case or some of the other ones that have come forward. And we get little glimpses of data, but we don't get all the data. And of course, if you listen to Kirkpatrick, even with the NASA team, the panel that happened was that, data needs to be multisensory, that you need to be able to get multiple sensors and things like that kind of information, because you do have calibration errors and you have other kinds of errors that can be induced into equipment, right? And so equipment can lead to errors, and that could be a part of what you're seeing, right? So the important thing is that, in the case of the Nimitz case, you have the Spy-1 radar, which was able to pick up, and that's a phased radar that's able to capture these kind of objects at these speeds. You had eyes on it, in a sense that you had two aircraft that were seeing it, and then you had an at-FLIR kind of camera system on a thermal capability to be able to get and capture the video of the object. And so you have, again, multi-sensors, and you have very credible pilots with, a lot of 4 pilots in a plane are all looking at it with their 2 sets of eyeballs. And then you have the jet aircraft chasing it. And anyway, so there's a lot of that kind of thing that we'd like to be able to get more of, and we could do something with. And then plus, in addition to that, SU's got long time history of people that have been involved. I personally, I know you mentioned for 54 years, and I'm up right now. I'm up to 59 years. I got one more year, and I'll have 6 decades into this. So we have a lot of experienced people. We have a variety of disciplines like you wouldn't believe. And if you were going to have a group of people that you could go to, a think tank, if you would, with a lot of incredibly talented individuals that are very, very capable. Why wouldn't you leverage something out of the SCU? And if it's a matter of us signing NDAs or of signing some sort of agreements, we could do that. Of
Oh,
course, I have a
yeah.
clearance, but I mean, and there's a number of us that do have some sort of a clearance that we could leverage. But again, we just like to be able to see that data and do something with it. And in the meantime, although they're not sharing, we're going to continue to do studies, and we are doing studies, publishing papers, analyzing the data that we do have, and we're going to go on.
Yeah, well, and my belief, and I guess in the interest of fairness, I did join the SCU. I'm one of the many people who joined, but I have loved the work that you guys have done forever. And I would say if AARO did want to start to branch out and build bridges with the civilian sector, right? Yeah, the SCU is, again, it's the most rigorous science. It is just the best quality, and it is people who are committed to doing honest research, right? And
Yeah.
and that's not to say negative things about, what else is going on. It's just that the SCU has always been focused on cutting through the mythology and cutting through a lot of the unknowns to get to the hard data and building off that. So,
Thank you. That's well stated. And to me, it is about following the data. And and if you follow the data, then you can come up with some sort of determination about what it could or couldn't be, and then you try to look at all of the possible explanations for it, and then like, for example, even with the Aguadilla thing, well, it's no, it's not a balloon because we've seen what balloons look like in thermal. It's not a bird because we know what balloons like in thermal, and so you try to do these comparisons, and obviously realizing the fact that you may not be getting classified information in terms of capabilities. There's a number of us that do have access to classified systems to be able to see if it fits, and we can say, well, doesn't fit. and the bottom line is we can do that kind of look, and we try to do that for everything we look at, and it's just, but it's a struggle to be able to, again, to be able to come up with, even in the Aguadilla timeframe, when we wanted to do peer reviews, we tried to go to different organizations to see if they were willing to do a peer review with us, and they wouldn't.
yeah.
And so we ended up, well, we went to France, and Sigma 2, who is located under basically their NASA CNES, was willing to do a look at the paper and give us some sort of a cursory review and that type of thing. But we need to have that systematically in place. And since then, we've now got an SU review process where if we do publish a paper, we can go through that process with unbiased people to give us their feedback and so on. So we're making progress, is what I'm saying.
Well, and speaking of papers, actually, I wanted to just raise awareness about a paper by Sean Kirkpatrick that was co-authored with Avi Loeb, and they talked about the possibility that a Moa may have been related to UAP, and they were talking about this in the context of extraterrestrial technology. And so I had wondered at the time, I thought, could this kind of be a quiet signal by Kirkpatrick that he is open to or receptive to this idea of UAPs being extraterrestrial? And I've since wondered, just from the timeline of how things are coming out, again, it sounds a little conspiratorial for me to say this, but I was like, if there is some kind of a coordinated effort to drip information, it almost seems like that fits into it, right? We had the whistleblower legislation at the beginning of the year. We had that paper where, AARO has been very focused on their job, which is wonderful. But then there was that one-off paper where he was like, well, potentially if it was extraterrestrial, it could be this. Then, 3 months later, we had David Grusch with the bombshell. Now we have hearings, and the word on the street is that there are whistleblowers that are coming out of the woodwork, I guess. So we may or may not see much more. I'm not sure what's going to happen there.
Well, one thing for sure, there's going to be more hearings. So we're anticipating that there will be more hearings that will happen. There could be different parts of the government that also have hearings. It's not just the oversight committee. So with that, there could potentially be other hearings than which that we're going to get to hear more. We are still waiting for the NASA report to come out, which should be due out this next month, talking about what it basically is came up with in terms of using their sensor data, their satellites, or various other kinds of things to assist in also giving more sensors toward objects. There's been a lot of discussion about the possibility of getting like even a cell phone app that would be made available to the public and that they could use to help to identify where these objects are, and also provide additional data. This is something that we talked about, and I talked about like for years, even with MUFON, and we actually did develop an app, by the way, at one point, but they kind of took it down. But ultimately, you have that kind of means of doing that. In addition to that, we should be dealing with NOAA, because NOAA has satellites. You have also other kinds of aircraft in the area, and like I pointed out to you that they don't fall within the DoD space, but they might fall into just the general government, if you were. Like NOAA doesn't fall into the DoD, and it doesn't fall into even the intelligence community. So I mean. So we need to get all across agency, all agencies playing a part in this. You could have weather stations, that have weather radar that could be potentially tapped for possibly objects that are in the area, that it may be picked up on a weather radar, even though that their scan rate is a lot lower. But it's all within the realm of possibility. And so I think that we need to be able to leverage a full government kind of perspective and sensory information, and that really needs to be pressed. And I don't see that being discussed a lot. And that's, I don't know where AARO is going with that, but I'd like to see them, get into that. I'd like to see them do a complete cross government and have access and the authority that they need to be able to go even beyond Title 10 and beyond Title 50. I think, if you took a look at the congressional hearing, it's very clear that commercial pilots are seeing objects, right?
Yeah.
They're seeing the same things, right? Well, they're not in Title 10 and they're not in Title 50, but why aren't we gathering their data and information with the same equivalency that we want to be able to get military data? And maybe it's also equipping commercial airlines with some sort of gear that they can use to be able to detect or get some of that information, other than using, their little cell phone cameras, And so, Tim, they just need to look very broadly at how they can get very multi-central data from a lot of different rational sources.
Well, so one of the things that I really wanted to ask you about was, in addition to Representative Tim Burchett and kind of the usual suspects, I guess, as it were, this hearing also featured questions by high-profile representatives such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the U.S. representative for New York's 14th Congressional District.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering if her involvement, which usually isn't associated with UFOs, I'm wondering if that indicates that the stigma is disappearing, and could this be an indicator also that UFOs are going mainstream in American culture?
I think, what we're seeing here is an educational process on the part of the people in government that we've elected. This is not on a lot of their radars. This topic, when you look at it, look at what's going on in the world. It's like, there's a lot of people that are dealing with the fact that, well, we got a war in Ukraine, we've got horrible climate kind of situations to face, where we've got, threats all around the world that we're trying to deal with. There's the financial aspect. So there's a lot of people that are, like all over the board in terms of focusing on higher priorities that are duly correct, but at the same time, there is this thing called the UAP that keeps cropping up, and we've kind of like turned a blind eye toward for 70 years, that oh, by the way, they're in our airspace. Take a look at the attention we had with the Chinese balloon, right? Well,
Yeah.
Suddenly everybody's going crazy and calling it's a UFO, and they didn't even know what to call it. And then the president was being asked about it. So, well, guess what? We need the same attention focused on these objects from everybody. And I think that, what we saw in that hearing, and the fact that they're starting to get on board. They're starting to understand, wait a minute, yeah, there is something to it. And you couldn't have asked for three better witnesses to try to portray how serious this is. than the ones you did have, right? I mean, they took it out of the ballpark, and to my estimation, and the other part about it is, well, all of us, ufologists, or if you would, or UAPologists, or whatever you want to call us, that while we all have heard about those stories and know fully well what they were practically going to say, it's not on the official record, and they were under oath, and that is the important thing, that they were finally under oath. I'm not lying. This is what happened, and it's now on an official record, which then gives Congress and all these political people the justification to move forward with the things that they'd like to be able to do, right? So it needed to happen, and I'm glad that it did.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely wonderful to see this all moving forward. And it's interesting also, you were kind of alluding to a disconnect in American culture, and I think that's really important to point out. So earlier this week in another conversation, like one of the best examples of this that comes to my mind was, I was talking about the Fermi paradox, right? And the whole idea is, if the universe is full of life, how come extraterrestrials aren't here? I believe those were Enrico Fermi's actual words. Why aren't they here? It's little known that the Fermi paradox discussion was actually inspired by a cartoon in the New Yorker. And they read this at lunch. They're looking at a picture of a UFO and saying, how come they're not here? I was like, well, so is it that it's disingenuous, or is it just that it's become so much a product of media? I mean, even back then, that we just don't think of it as being real. So it's interesting. There's a lot of cultural change that has to happen.
You're absolutely right, and we're I think that for me, it's a situation where the cultural change that I've seen over my nearly 6 decades with it was, we went through the Blue Book period. That was, report your flying saucers, and that sounded kind of interesting. And a lot of people were seeing flying discs, flying saucers, and so on and so forth. And then we had, of course, the Condon report came up, and Condon report said, yea, verily, there's no security threat, which is interesting, by the way, in the fact that you're making there's no security threat, despite the fact that 30% of the cases you have in your report you couldn't identify. But at the same time, you had this. Then it was that report, which was a huge volume, by the way, was blessed by the National Academy of Sciences and said, yea, verily, please don't turn in any scientific journal papers on the subject of UFOs, because it's ridiculous. We've already said that there's nothing to it. So basically, to the public, shut up.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, what you have is you're going through the checkout stands and you're looking at the tabloid paper there, that's the Weekly News or something like that, which is all written by the CIA. CIA basically, that's basically saying that they show Clinton holding a baby, an alien baby, or shaking hands with an alien, and you're finding out that they've made it into just a carnival or a joke for everybody, and that's a systematic propaganda that we're getting that basically says, laugh at this stuff, don't treat it seriously. So then what I see in my history is this, well, we can't talk about it anymore. There's not going to be any discussions about it, but occasionally you'd hear reports that would happen, and it would be like, the media people would be saying, ha ha ha, we have another UFO report. The kooks are out tonight, right? And for me to now be in a position where after 2017, with the New York Times articles and the release of the 3 videos that subsequent, and then Lou Elizondo coming out, that whole conversation started to change. And now you can have today hallway conversations in a lot of different places around the water cooler that you couldn't have in the past. And that's what a big time cultural change that I'm seeing, to the point now where the government is saying, well, wait a minute, these UFOs or UAP are real. I mean, they exist. Yeah. Okay. That's a very incredible, statement when you put that in the context of the Blue Book report and the closure of Project Blue Book back in 1970, right? 69 and 70. So, I mean, that's a big time cultural change and shift. And now we're having, this thing is like literally all over the board in terms of the news media. It's on national media. It's now become a global kind of conversation that we're having. And that is a very profound change from my standpoint, having been in it and looking back at it and saying that, wow, I'm very thankful. I'm being validated, basically, that my time wasn't wasteful, or that I wasn't some kook that was running around talking about UFOs and flying saucers in my earlier days. I may be a kook, but anyway, the point is that I'm treating this seriously, and others are doing the same thing. And so I'm very, very thankful that I could be alive at this point and have this. Can you imagine what it'd be like if Dr. Jalen Hynek were living now, to see this kind of attention on the thing that he spent his time in his career working with?
Yeah, it would be tremendous validation, and I think it is for everyone who has been continuing to, carry this flame, I guess, carry the torch, so to speak, for all these years.
Yeah, Tim, and I even mentioned this on a show just recently. I said, it's a situation where, there are a lot of pilots that have reported these things for a very long time. Now, what Fravor and what Ryan did was get to validate all of their sightings that they had back in the early days, right? They were being validated. And that's an important thing for us to take in right now and really recognize. You go back to the summer of 1952, and if you read the report on unidentified flying objects by Captain Edward Ruppelt, who was the head of Project Blue Book, right? In the very beginning of his book, he starts off with the first sentence, which says, in the summer of 1952, a pilot shot at a UFO. And then he proceeds to go in and talk about that case, because he ended up going to the fighter base where it happened. And that pilot, for example, describes the fact that he was with another F-86, and they were both out. There was a radar target that they were going after, and the next thing you know is that what happened was that they were maybe 40,000 feet. Apparently, the radar wasn't able to get an altitude; it could get the distance and a direction, but at that time, it couldn't get the altitude. So they were kind of up at 40,000. Then they came down. One of the F-86s was at 20,000 feet. Another one dropped down to about 5,000 feet. And the guy at 5,000 feet was the one who then happened to encounter what he thought at first was a weather balloon. But then as he got closer to it, and he got within, 100, yards of it, he was actually able to make out the fact that, no, this is a disc-shaped object. And he's tracking behind it. He's at a low altitude. His comms didn't work at the altitude that he was at. And he said, well, what do I do next? So he basically decided to take and shoot it. And so he tried to shoot at it, right? Well, the object immediately shot up and climbed up and out of the picture, right? And then, basically he came back and he had to file a report of what he experienced, because he was actually shooting at an object, number one. And he was pulled on the carpet and told that he had to go at a psych ops. And they had to, do a psych eval on him, and they, came back and basically threatened him. His report that he had written was put into the trash and incinerated. Basically so it was not on record. And yet this is the kind of same kind of retribution that Ryan Graves talked about. That of course that Fravor didn't get to experience that, thankfully, but other pilots who are coming forward to Ryan Graves for the Americans for Safe Skies, or I can't remember now what the exact acronym is, but bottom line is that he's getting people that are coming forward that are actually now commercial pilots included, who are talking about their encounters. And a lot of them don't want to talk about it too much because they're afraid their companies are going to come back at them, or there's going to be some sort of retribution that they would hear from things. But I think it's a lot more common than we know. I think that pilots around the world are seeing these things. I think that mariners are also seeing them and not reporting them, and we would be seeing that there is a larger presence than what we think.
Well, on that note, Rich, let me thank you so much for your time today. Let me close by reminding everybody that your thoughts, your analysis, and all of this comes out of, I mean, not only your own extensive career, but this incredible organization that you've helped build with the SCU. They can learn more about that at explorescu.org. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And so I just want to urge everyone to visit that, but let me close by asking what you think that we may see over the next few months, if you have any prognostication, I guess.
Well, I do anticipate, that we'll get the report from NASA, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to come up with on that. At the same time, there should be some sort of a report from AARO. We expect that we'll get some sort of a project status or something of that nature. Then you'll have obviously the push through of the NDAA and setting up that Schumer helped put in place in terms of getting the records to all be coming forward through some sort of a review board that can help to eliminate some of those classification issues we keep seeing with a lot of this type of thing, and maybe we actually get to see more. So I think a lot of those efforts will happen. Plus, there could be potentially other hearings that we might even hear about. So I'm encouraged that there's going to be a continued conversation, at least through the end of this year, that we're going to continue to hear about this subject, and I'm glad for that. But other than that, I'm not really sure what's going to happen.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tim. I'm glad to be on with you, and good to see you again.